When trying to remember what my own education about the Holocaust was like, I recall a few episodes. Okay? Okay. Episode 1. My grandmother, who was born in 1980, died when I was not even 9 years old. I perfectly remember a story she told me about her schoolmate with whom she had lost touch shortly after the outbreak of the war. But before they lost contact, my grandma has given her friend her own favorite polka dot dress because the young woman, her friend, was about to leave for an unspecified destination. Nothing was heard of her since, though every now and then some information would reach my grandmother from people who had allegedly chanced to see her. They would report that she did not look well, and that the polka dot dress was long past its prime. Episode 2. A detailed 1948 poem by Żurek, which we read at school in the 5th grade, I guess, and rather felt than understood it. Revolving around a Goethe play, which is spotted by a visitor to Auschwitz in a huge box brimmed with human fur and serves as a metonymy for the Holocaust. The poem could not but stir acute anxiety. I was easy, in particular for girl readers sporting similar pigtails, to identify with the victim, though the victim herself remained entirely universal, simply a murdered child. The child seemed stripped of any conceivable national, ethnic, and religious background, even though the first stanza of the poem quoted the testimony of Rudolf Leder, one of the 2 survivors of the Belzec extermination camp, and thus clearly suggested in what terms the text could, if not should, be read. Episode 3. Then the time came to read Kamień na Szaniec, Stones for Rampart by Alexander Kamiński, a book identified by Jan as the most influential myth-making piece of writing, powerfully formative of the national and patriotic awareness of many generations of Poles. Stone for the Rampart tells a story of young people and their heroic attitudes during the Second World War. Elżbieta Janicka points out that though the book was printed in July 1943 and then reprinted a year later, little before the Warsaw Uprising, both editions pictured occupied Warsaw as a city without a ghetto. They also picture occupied Poland as a country without Jews. This way, my first memory as a child was mapped with victims, but those victims had to fit the matrix that left out Jews and omitted the Holocaust. This is consistent with Przemysław Czapliński's insightful observation that the Holocaust was a retroactive catastrophe. It was a disaster which went unnoticed and unacknowledged while it lasted. Even later, when the Holocaust was known as a certain fact, it remained unrecognized in Poland for a long time, because the common belief was that it was of no consequence for non-Jews. Research shows that it's only recently that much belated Holocaust narratives have come to us, urgently calling for interpretation. I believe that the Holocaust as a retroactive catastrophe is unfolding not only in historical and cultural narratives, but also in private space. What exactly do I mean by it? The private individually experienced retroactive catastrophe strikes the moment that fragments of reports, vestiges of once heard information, reminiscences of once read books, and scenes from once seen films assemble to produce an image that makes me think and stubbornly refuses to leave me unmoved. It took a long time, indeed, before my private portfolio of the Holocaust, such as my grandma's polka dot dress worn by a young woman most likely in the Penguin ghetto, a pigtail in Auschwitz, and the surprising absence of Jews in stones for the ramparts, slowly fell into place and combined into a Holocaust narrative reinforced by the secondary school reading list, which featured the beautiful Mrs. Selman by Andrzej Szczypiorski, Shielding the Flame by Hanna Kral, and This Way for the Guests, Ladies and Gentlemen by Tadeusz Borowski. The system of education, of which I was a part as a schoolgirl, only rarely mentioned Jewish victims. It did use Zofia Naukowska's celebrated phrase, people doomed people for the state, but not in a context of Jewish extermination. I had a feeling that my generation was deeply sensitive, if not to the Holocaust itself, then undoubtedly to one of the places where it took place, especially to Auschwitz, which we, young as we were back then, would call Oświęcim. It was a special space indeed. It was largely left untouched by education. It stirred our imagination so profoundly that we immediately stretched the Auschwitz imaginary by snatching and annexing any story and any image that showed a connection with such narrative. A similar experience surfaced in the memories of Wilhelm Sosnauer, a well-known Polish painter whose paintings are on display at such a landscape temporarily shown at the Polish Museum of the History of Polish Jews in Warsaw. Sosnauer recalls that when he was working on one of his pictures showing the Austrian geometry of pigsties, his father was certain that the canvas depicted concentration camp barracks. This was the old man's first association. The education system of which I was part as a schoolgirl was reluctant to admit that the work has lost its innocence. Academia Pana Pleczna, The Academy of Mr. Inkblot, a popular book by Jan Żurek, an almost permanent picture of school reading list in Poland, was as a rule approached as a story about an eccentric educator running his eccentric lessons and about the fight of good and evil. The fairy tale revolved around the motive of school learning and original teaching methods applied by Ambroży Inglot, the master and owner of the academy, adored by the boys in his church. This made the academy an archetype of the school and an object of a longing, ensuring undying popularity to the book itself. The interpretive mother was deeply entrenched in and so powerfully reinforced by Polish classrooms that it never occurred to anybody to read the book through any other lens, even though there is ample encouragement in the text itself to do just that. The book is actually the first original Polish fairy tale to be published after the war. Brzechwa wrote this book under the Nazi occupation, but if this wartime origin was ever mentioned, it was only with a view to spelling out that Brzechwa's work on that book had been his way of forgetting about the war. The fact that he was Jewish himself was not limited relevant the interpretation of his book. But why should we actually assume that the Academy of Mr. Inglot is a fairy tale or an exercise in escapism rather than the contrary, an entirely fairy tale that destroys hope? Published in 1946, the book was originally addressed to young readers who were between 7 and 11 years old at the time, and as such, had not only lived through the war but also remembered it. I suppose that they had been waiting for a therapeutic book, but what they received instead was a fairy tale about a fantasy constructed world, a caring teacher, a distinguished scholar who looked after a bunch of boys that stood out from their peer group. Mr. Inglot's students could not cope with life and were sent to the academy by their parents, who trusted in the teacher's power to make them into decent people. Briefly, the boys were defective and their defects were supposed to be removed by Mr. Inglot's educational methods. If at this point you perceive some parallels between the narrative about Mr. Inglot and the pursuit of Janusz Korczak and his pedagogical thought, you are by no means alone to be struck by this similarity. Mr. Inglot is a wonderful and sensitive teacher who announced to his students that they will not teach them anything. Instead, he will put some brains into their heads. On closer inspection, this utopian didactic announcement shows Mr. Inglot's educational plan. The children's thing at the academy is not acquiring knowledge, rather, its focus is on a collaboration, on work upon one's deficit, and I know it will sound grandiloquent, on wisdom. When a doll named Aloysius appears at the academy and Mr. Inglot is expected to turn it into a real boy, the familiar order of things is put into questions. Aloysius, himself a non-human and automotion, learns things very quickly, but as Mr. Inglot observes, does not understand anything. Unlike the defective boys studying at the academy, Aloysius is a perfect machine and as such never entertains any doubts, asks no questions and cares for nobody but spins dream of power. Regrettably, these dreams will come soon. Aloysius who was now considerably called other in the Swiss adaptation of the book, in a sense explodes the system created by Mr. Ingvar from within, and the academy ceases to be. But before the end comes, the boys will have to watch the weakness of their master as he shrinks and slowly withdraws from the academy, only to entirely disappear in the final scene of the destruction of the school. Although Mr. Ingvar is a no Prometheus for his boys, to whom he gives fire and hope, creating them anew, he will ultimately be divested of his fire. The attack of fire happens on the night when Mr. Ingvar prepares a dazzling farewell surprise for his students. After a summer speech, he staged a spectacle with a Christmas tree at the center, which is illuminated with hundreds of candles that he lights up using a flame he has brought in his fireproof pocket. These candles are the symbols of Christmas Eve, which might be expected to have an optimistic ending, where darkness receives ousted imagined light. This, however, is not what happened, that if the ending is veritable, cruel as evil, personified in Aloysius and his constructor Philip the barber wins. The latter takes the light away, hiding the candle flames in the pockets of his coat. As a matter of fact, Ingvar has prepared his students for such finale. In his speech, he said, "I will be sorry to part with you. We have spent the whole year together, making love and having a good time, but everything must come to an end." In fact, what he does is probing into the meaning of education, whose relevance can only be assessed in liminal situations. Ingvar seems to be wondering whether his educational ideas will pass the test of practice and make sense of what is about to happen. Ingvar actually faces his students and asks, "You are facing a wall. What will you do with it?" The fundamental pedagogical question about the power of education, about the agency of students, and about the possibility to spark hope in situations where all hope is taken away, reverberates not only in Janusz Korczak's educational writings, but also in the diary he had in the Warsaw Ghetto, as well as in a performance he had his children staged directly before their deportation to Treblinka. Rzepa's fairy tale also abounds with other themes that help identify it as a text pulsating with references to the Holocaust. Let me briefly list them: the similarity of the Academy of the Kolchak orphanage, the dramatic end of the Academy redolent of the destruction of the country, and the blowing up of the great synagogue during the uprising in the Warsaw Ghetto, the totalitarian pursuit of Aloysius and his constructor Philip, and last but not least, Ingvar himself. In the Polish etymological dictionary, the word kleks Inkblot denotes a stain of ink. We take for granted this meaning of the eponymous protagonist's name because the fairy tale swarms with references to the topoy of script and writing. Mr. Inkblot holds lessons of inkblography. His knowledge is inscribed on clay tablets, and he himself sets out on a journey in search of ink in the following parts of the trilogy, in order to write the word anew. And with the order which was lost in the disaster. Very small to do, however. The etymological dictionary also says that flex and inkblot, a stain of ink, had a once popular but barely used today synonym in Polish. The synonym was Żyd, that is a Żur, a stain, a smudge resulting from a careless motion while painting of simply a bundle of a bleach used to be colloquially called Żyd, a Jew. In the other words, young Jaffa suggested an interpretive key in the very title of his fairy tale by calling it the Academy of Mr. Inkblot, that is, the Academy of Mr. Żur. We have long ignored this interpretive key, preferring to treat this popular school reading as an opportunity for pleasant entertainment. I do not mean to say that schools should adopt the Holocaust model of reading, the Academy of Mr. Inkblot. As a matter of fact, I can hardly imagine Polish lessons with 9 or 10 years old in which this interpretation is actually espoused. But I can easily think of rereading the Academy of Mr. Inkblot in higher grades or in secondary school, where the earlier approach would be re-examined and updated. As a teacher of Polish, I have taught such lessons. On those occasions, I found that the reading of the book resonates with selected context. I believe that this model of reading fosters attentiveness, which can be practiced through returning to the text and supported by the pedagogy of suspicion vis-à-vis the text, prompting readers to review its meanings from multiple angles. This practice may already be in place. I remember that teaching a Polish lesson about 6 years ago, I invited my students to interpret Sasna's painting, Las, in English forest. The painting is a close reminiscence of a scene from Claude Lanzmann's Shoah, in which Lanzmann, his interpreter and witness are standing in a clearing where an act of genocide was perpetrated. Where is a wall of trees behind them? My students were not familiar with Lanzmann's film, but when they saw Sasna's painting, they directly started talking about the Holocaust. This was their immediate association. Surprised with what they had said, I tried to retrace the line of reasoning. They explained that the wall of trees of Sasna's paintings reminded them more of a maze than a bit of the forest, and that the picture was entitled Fate. Apparently, when putting together my multimedia presentation, I made typo. and spelled las, forest, and lost, is this in English fate. In Polish, these three-letter words only differ in one letter, but this tiny difference triggered a cascade of association in the minds of my students, members of the following post-Holocaust generation, a generation which has been exposed to a far from perfect Holocaust education, which nevertheless does greatly surpass the one I received as a schoolgirl. What model of post-memory is offered to Polish youngsters today? Children's and young adults literature about the Holocaust began to proliferate after the year 2000 and 2010s, marked by a veritable mushroom of such writings. As is usual, the case with such shifts and chronological divisions, it's challenging to accurately pinpoint the reasons for such a surge of interest in the theme, other than obvious causes such as an increasing fascination with post-memory and migrations of some French from literature to others. All those obvious factors combine to build and progressively nearly empty landscape of children's literature about the Holocaust with new compelling texts. I believe wait a minute, please. I believe that the year of culture, which was celebrated in Poland in 2012, importantly sparked writers to take up these problems. The important anniversary commemorated in 2012 included the 70th anniversary of Korczak's death in the death camp of Treblinka, and the centenary of the foundation of the Orphan's House in Krukmana Street in Warsaw. It's likely that the year of Korczak boosted writers' interest not only in the Holocaust itself, but also, if not primarily, in the various ways of telling about the event. The place that Holocaust narratives take in children's books on the map of literature may resemble the space allotted by the Polish Museum of the History of Polish Jews to Korczak, who was made the patron of the family education area. The place is dedicated to children and their caregivers, to whom it mainly offers multicultural workshops. This space had not been part of the original design of the museum buildings, and it was only created after the museum was built. Arranged in what was first supposed to be a cafe. This children-dedicated museum space, which was initially treated as a mere annex to the main building, today plays an important role in fostering attitudes and raising consciousness about Jewish culture and history. The place and role of children's literature may be similar in this respect. The list of Polish books that address the Holocaust is anything but short, and additionally it's constantly expanding. Given this, I will not enumerate all books about Holocaust published in Poland after the year 1000. Instead, I will list the most popular and, in my view, most interesting iteration of Holocaust narratives. For this catalogue, to have some semblance of order, I will rely on the work of Sławomir Jacek, who has studied tens, perhaps hundreds, of relevant texts and identified a series of Holocaust reports. Among the most salient of them are the ghetto wall in black eyes and the train. The figure of Jan Korczak himself is, of course, an immensely popular Holocaust topos in his own right. A number of books revolve around Korczak as the narrative axis. For example, jest taka historia opowiedzi o Januszu Korczaku, Jana Strowicka, Zwyczajny dzień, Katarzyna Zimmer, po drugiej stronie okna opowiedź o Januszu Korczaku, Anna Czerwińska-Rydel, Pamiętnik Blumki, Iwona Chmielewska, a ostatnie przedstawienie Pani Ester, Adam Jaromir Gabriela Cichocka. The two latter ones are pictures. There is a story and an ordinary day are books for young children. Ostrowicka and Zimmer juxtapose two temporal phases as well, the action of the books inserting our times, the past, including the story of Korczak manages to make its way to the protagonists who live here and now. This is made possible either by the memory of the older generation or by the educational ideas of the old doctor himself. If the plot of Ostrowicka's book sounds simple enough, since Korczak's life is recounted to the protagonist by his grandmother, the narrative devices employed by Zimmer present Korczak to her readers seem more sophisticated. Every chapter of her books opens with a quotation from Korczak's educational writings, and later his works are confronted with contemporary stories of the main protagonist, who daily copes with problems at school and in family. By constructing her book in this way, Zimmer insists that Korczak's ideas from nearly 1 century ago still await implementation, and that contemporary children really need them. Through the window is a comparatively written biographical novel for slightly other children. Having established herself as an acclaimed writer of biographies for children, Czerwińska took the challenge posed by the Korczak legend. The effect is nothing short of impressive. The writer sought a symptomatic detail that would focalize the construction of the main protagonist in the biography. The title itself, To the Window, contains the key word for Czerwińska readers' version of the Korczak story. Namely, she foregrounds the window panes, observation, distance, and insight into what remains concealed to others. The writer insists that instead of being remembered as someone on the other side of the wall, Korczak should rather be viewed as a person on the other side of the window, attentive, gazing, watching, offering hope. By Czerwińska reader's admission, the title of the book was inspired by the occupation of Korczak's grandfather, who was a glazier. Certainly, the writer's intuition did not fail her in choosing the title. And what I mean is obviously not the craft applied by Korczak's grandfather, but the fact that Korczak's pedagogical writings are replete with terms such as window, grave, and their likes. Iwona Chmielewska's Blomka's diary has garnered widespread acclaim and won multiple awards. Its narrative takes as its starting point a family photograph of 12 children from the orphan's house with Korczak standing behind them. The image brings to mind traditional class photo, and it also serves as the conventional myth of the children's community and is reminiscent of the memorial in Yad Vashem. Notably, Korczak does not occupy at the center of the picture in Chmielewska's book. Rather, he provides the background against which children's stories stand out. That there are 12 children is hardly a coincidence. This meaningful number may be construed as referring to the number of the apostles and the juxtaposition of Judaic and Christian symbolisms may be read as a nod to both cultures. The reading of Blomka's diary requires archaeological work with its repeated resumptions, scooping, and digging out ever new layers of meaning. In line with Korczak's insistence that children are most important, the story is narrated by a girl named Blomka, who records the story of her community in her diary. At the same time, however, by sketching the children, she also outlines a portrait for the educator. In relying on an original plot of letting a child speak, Chmielewska clearly embraces the motive of testimony, witness, deeply entrenched in the repertoire of Holocaust recall, like Anna Frank, Dawid Witkowicz, Ludka Laskier, and Dawid Sierakowicz. Blomka writes a journal. The young diary keepers put her notes down in a notebook, which straightforwardly emphasizes the unofficial character of her testimony. I have a problem with my presentation. Okay. So, her miniature stories about Regina, who has lost her hair, about little Kosik who uses his body to help carry coal and poles, and about kind-hearted Zygmunt, who buys a goldfish only to let it out swimming freely in the Vistula, added up to an image of Korczak as a great educator of small things. The last page of Blomka's diary contains her promise to write about the rest tomorrow, which is followed by a note from a German lesson with the word "they" snatched as in by tears. The word "they" appears to have been scribbled in a hurry, alternating capital and regular letters, and ultimately crossed out, which is of probability refers to the impending events which are not communicated directly. manner of talking about the Holocaust is also embodied in Michał Jusinek's booklet Powieki. Attached to the program of musical entitled Simple Kolchak, staged by the Podlasie Opera and Philharmonic in the city of Białystok. Jusinek tells a story about a flock of mice which ran up a small hill to flee raging fire. Realizing that they are going to die, the mice look up at the sky to be the last image they remember. Miss Esther's last performance is a picture book by Jana and Cichowska, who have woven their story of quotes of paraphrases from Kolchak's real diary and passages from fictitious diary of Jana, a girl from the orphan house. The two narratives by the educator and by the student unfold at the same time, so they lend themselves to inclusion in a democratic discourse of the orphan's house. Brown-tinted monochromatic illustration by Cichowska made one think of pre-war photographs. Readers are pushed into the textual world of the ghetto, comprising information, posters, advertisements, signboards, excerpts from newspaper write-ups, calendar pages, postcards and letters from Palestine, plates illustrating the play being stage maps of children's drawings. The oppressive quality of German information posters is muffled in the cacophony of other texts which attempt to produce a substitute for normative in the ghetto. At the same time, readers receive obvious hints that this is only a professional work built of paper, which is very fragile material. This work is absolutely helpless in the face of the violence. But manuscripts don't burn. Jana decided to write down her story, to help herself perceive the memory of her beloved educator, Esterka Winogromówna. Esterka was asked to engage children in the staging of a performance based on Tagore's The Post Office. The performance was envisioned as therapeutic and it prepared the children for the dramatic ending. In the narrative, the fiction of preparation for the performance is merely a pretext for sketching visions of everyday life of the orphan's house. The performance also brings Mr. Esther into relief among all the educators, usually overshadowed by the monumental figure of Kolchak. In Jaroni's tale, the doctor represents the male inner life, dominated by observation and commentary. In parallel, Jana's childlike story is unfolding with Kolchak's assistant as its central character. But she seldom obtains an opportunity to speak for herself because she is constantly being interpreted by the girl narrator. When talked about Kolchak, Stefania Pilczyńska and Esterka Winogromówna, I believe it makes a lot of sense to consider one more person whose biography has proven highly compelling for children's literature. I will only mention her for the record. The person I have in mind is obviously Ilan Assender, was portrayed in Wszystkie moje mamy, On My Mother by Ilan University, and Listy w butelce, Letters in a Bottle by Anna Czerwińska-Ryder, the writer I have already involved. Attention is undoubtedly due to books that tackle the relation of Poles and Jews as neighbors, Poles' attitudes to the Holocaust, their attempts to save Jewish neighbors, and the other way around, manifestation of dislike or of aggression against the needy and their victims. These motives are highlighted in an array of books, including Irena Landau's autobiographical Ostatnikienko, The Top Floor, Jana Lubnianska's pale-like under the simple title XY, Andrzej Marek Grabowski's Wojna na Pięknym Brzegu, War at the Zolibor, and Katarzyna Rydyk's Bombka Babki Zilberstein, Rani Zilberstein. All these books explore the difference between the Polish and Jewish faiths. Things Jewish must be hidden to survive. Wrong looks make the ghetto of natural space of the Jewish child, and if the child manages to get out of the ghetto, she or he must hide in the closet in someone's house or somewhere in the country. Whatever the situation, the young escapee is almost always protected by a Polish family. An exception to this rule can be found in Agata Kuszyńska's recently published Mama zapraszają, Mom Always Comes Back, which recounts a true story of a 2-year-old Jewish girl whom her Jewish mother keeps hidden in a cellar for long months in order to protect her. Young readers find out that children living in hiding could easily be denounced by a crime gossip who goes on a hunt for the traces of Jewish lodgers and repeatedly calls on her neighbors and announced or by a greedy passerby who smells easy money in blackmail. The topos of a hiding place is employed slightly differently in Anka Czasu by Marcin Szpigielski. The book opens with Rafał, the main protagonist, going to the library for another batch of books. The child freely walks the maze of narrow streets, full of familiar signboards, as if he were strolling right heartedly in the known and secure places. The paradox of the opening episode lies in the fact that the reader has no idea that the trip takes place in the Warsaw ghetto. Rafał seems to feel perfectly comfortable in the space. He will only experience estrangement when he gets out of the ghetto. With his hair bleached, he is taken by an unknown woman away from his beloved grandfather and from the ghetto, which he has considered home so far. From this moment, he remains in hiding in the Warsaw Zoo, where he comes to meet other runaways Jews. Szczygielski uses the fantasy convention to make his protagonist move through time channels into the future, where he meets his future granddaughter and initiates her into engaging with the past. Those books do not seek to idealize Polish Jewish relationships. They emphasize that although the suffering on Jews could bring the two communities closer together, they did not always unite even under such conditions, perhaps because they had actually never been a unity before. Empathy, compassion, and something had extended to the needy indicate that it was only the war that made non-Jews develop interest in Jews. Even though they had been neighbors for centuries, the separateness of Polish and Jewish histories is perfectly rendered in War and the Jolly War. Its girl protagonist says, in the spring of 1943, a lot of terrible things happened, and uprising in the ghetto was another one. For several weeks, when I looked out of the window in the living room, I saw a glow of flames over the bridge. The ghetto was burning. Shots could be heard from there. I decided not to have even a modest birthday party in the glare of fires. The uprising in the ghetto belongs to another non-Polish tale, but the girl's solidarity with the dying male heralds some future change in relation between Poles and Jews. The topos of the Łódź ghetto and what is known as a Great Szpera is given a literary representation in Bezsenność Jutka Insomnia by Dorota Książyńska-Nogala and in Rutka by Jana Fabiańska. Both books refer to dramatic events in the Łódź ghetto and to a speech that Ilan University delivered to persuade people to voluntarily pick up children and all family members. In the end, they were killed in the Kulmok death camp in Helmo on the Nerve. Both writers rely on fantastic and Homeric conventions to somewhat mitigate their tales, but archival photos at the end of Jutka's Insomnia attest that the events needed to place. Szlamier by Ryszard Marek Grodzkiej is a book that may be of special interest to those involved in animal studies or endorsing any non-anthropocenic outlook of the world. Szlamier tells the story of an English bulldog that loses his home when his Jewish owners end up in the ghetto. While they are despised by people, they still remain cherished companions in the dog's view. The tale told by Grodzkiej is something more than just another account of the Holocaust related by the protagonist position below the child on the existential level. The book is aligned with the project of the Animal Turn and starts with attempts to salvage the memory not only of people but also of animals plunged into the vortex of human produce history. We owe it to animals, Grodzkiej seems to claim, if for no other reason than because in the times when humans failed to recognize other human as human, it was paradoxically a beast that did not lose its bearings and upheld proper standards and proportions. Still, the most interesting books include those that are to some extent autothematic, meaning that they reflect on the phenomenon of memory itself and communication between generations. While I feel that this issue is basically addressed in all the books I have mentioned so far, it's particularly pronounced an axiom to Kotka Brydzidy She Had by Jana, Wszystkie lajki Marczuka, All the Lives of Marczuk by Paweł Berensewicz and Mirabelka by Cezary Harasimowicz. I will focus on the two former titles as they apply more ingenious solutions. The narrative of Bridges She Had is split into two parts. The first tells the story of Helena, a young girl, whose carefree childhood is ruptured by the outbreak of the war. The girl must part with the familiar world, her favorite Jewish neighbors, her father's Jewish employee, and basically all the Jews that are forced to leave Praga, a district of Warsaw she inhabits, and move to the ghetto. In the second half, Helena is already an old woman in the area where she lives. She has been regarded as a lunatic because she is constantly searching for traces of her former Jewish neighbors. In the semblance of a funeral wailer, she dooms herself to loneliness and never starts a family in order to serve as a guardian of family. Helena believes that she preserves of Holocaust memory, but this memory paralyzes her, preventing her from taking any action and making her only able to ruminate on pain. Helena is infected with and possessed by pain, which brings to mind the book legend. It seems that Helena is in the tower of the book of memory and that she is a bearer of trauma which she is to pass into others. It is indeed the role of the Holocaust memory today. Thus, Bridges She Had inspired how to recount and teach the Holocaust in our times. Even as it does, I am far more in favor of the concept of accessing trauma rather than transmitting it. In this regard, all the lives of Marczuk, a modern and interesting young adult's book, come across as a perfect reading choice. The first sentence of the book reads, Marczuk didn't like Jews. This sounds scandalous to readers long exposed to intercultural education and political correctness. They have every reason to feel ill at ease, suspecting that Marczuk may be an anti-Semite, but this doubt are put short soon enough, as the text goes on to say. Two Jews, specifically Józef Wyszkower and Aaron Goldberg, they made him very angry. But Marczuk also liked Jews. 3 Jews, to be precise. Henry Gladys and Bell. It is thus clear that Marczuk is neither an anti-Semite nor a philo-Semite. In this book, Berensewicz corrects Holocaust-related stereotypes, images, and propos. One of them is an anti-Semitism, which educational discourse presents as one of the causes of the Holocaust. This is what students know because they had learned this at school. However, However, in all their rites of martyrs, anti-Semitism provides an emphasized soon enough since martyr is no anti-Semite. More than that, he saved a Jewish mother and her two children. He unexpectedly becomes a hero. Then another twist comes as it transpires that martyr has never existed. He is a phantasm, a product of imagination, an amalgam of books, films, and reverse testimonies collected by Adam, a contemporary schoolboy from Kosztówka. The ingenious student is well versed in the Holocaust imaginary. Its total had, after all, been taught in classroom. Building on his knowledge, he creates a plausible protagonist and forges a plausible story, complete with all the necessary paraphernalia, victims, hidings, escapes, traitors, cruel German soldiers, a noble-minded Jew who pardons a folk who has hurt him, and a small house that becomes an ark of the help-seeking Jews. Adam cynically exploits the Holocaust of all in order to gain popularity with his views. The Facebook account of Martyr, his fictitious hero, obtains more and more likes, which suggests that the Holocaust lesson has been well assimilated. Students have recognized the images present in Polish and history classroom and endorse them as their own ones. The fictional narrative responds to the needs of the shameful history of Polish-Jewish relations, about which they have in all probability learned at school as well. Narratives of the past make it expedient to have a hero who offers an alternative and antidote to stories which are difficult to accept. Beresevich's book proposed an excellent model of talking about the Holocaust, one in which the following generation is not attributed as trauma that is not theirs. Instead, the book explores truth, honesty in relating the past and intentions behind the transmissions of the past. The point is that the real problem we are facing today may no longer lie in anti-Semitism, but rather in what we are doing with the memory of the Holocaust. I believe that Berencevich comes up with a completely new narrative that ravels the reader's habit of post-memory inflected reading, which children's literature has steadily been instilling in them. The revolutionary quality of this tale consists in discarding the question, how does the Holocaust story affect you? And instead asking, what are you doing with your knowledge of the Holocaust? Memory based on such a foundation does not petrify, does not overwhelm, and does not isolate. What it does is making one think. Berencevich is certainly right when he claims that the Holocaust must be rethought. If it's not, we will become indifferent to it because it will be reduced to cliches and will communicate merely hackneyed stereotypes. In other words, the Holocaust will become blurred. What I mean is not this will become erased, because I believe that neither education nor literary production about the Holocaust will permit forgetting about it. But I mean is exactly blurring. Paradoxically enough, blurring may result as a nudge evading the theme of the Holocaust, which to some extent was my own educational experience, as also from excessive preoccupation with the Holocaust, which may trigger the sense of self-hate and, consequently, the delusion of interest. To prevent such glaring, earnest Van Alphen abuse, we must mobilize interpretive effort, imagination, and understanding so as to make change happen in the long run. Early in my presentation, I evoked Sassner's painting, including in the context of education. I have thought of his forest, which was misspelled as faith, and Stone Students' Association with the Holocaust. Let us draw the full circle and conclude by once again referring to Sassner's paintings displayed at the such a landscape show in the Podium Museum. Pierwszy stycznia blok and 1 stycznia tył, Sassner Pictures from 2021 registered his and his wife's passage through Oświęcim, during which they decided to drive up to the camp gate. The painting shows a profile of a woman against the backdrop of the camp. Of course, the woman's presence at the place may be casual, superficial, and disengaged. She is sitting in the car and is separated from the world by the car's window. Nevertheless, the presence of Auschwitz in the background cannot be overlooked. The woman in the portrait brings to my mind Piero della Francesca Quattrocento paintings, whose protagonists were united with the landscape. Auschwitz, however, is by no means innocence Renaissance scenery. It cannot be escaped, given up, or ignored. Even if we see a wide road ahead of us, even if we live behind the past reflected in the side view mirror, we are built into this landscape, so we must explore it as much as we possibly can, not for others, and not in the name of an abstract construct of memory, but simply for ourselves. If we consent to experience a private, retroactive catastrophe, we may be on the cusp of incisive change. Thank you very much.
Interesting lecture, and now we have only 15 minutes for our discussion because at 1 o'clock we have a lunch break. And now if anybody of us has any question, please ask it to Professor Wójcik-Dudek. It's very difficult to start, but I would like to ask, if I may, Małgorzata, do you know any reaction of students, of teachers for this kind of literature? Are there any interesting information about the reception of this literature? Could you tell us anything, something about it?
Thank you for this question, Professor Żurek. This very good question because I showed a lot of books, but the question is where is the place of this book in the education at school and in life, individual child and individual teacher? It's a very good question. I know that the very popular title of this book is Art Czasu by Szczygielski. Teachers at the Polish school very often try to read this book with their pupils, not students but pupils. Very popular title is Wszystkie moje matki about Ilana Sandler. But the question of Professor Żurek is about list of maybe books at the school. Among those books is only one which is a mandatory book. The mandatory book at primary school is Akademia Pana Kleksa. The absence of the school.
Okay, thank you so much. There is a question from Marina Valina.
Yeah, I'm trying to use my microphone. Do you hear me? Yeah, you do. So thank you very much for an excellent presentation. I mean, you surprised me with Brzechwa because this is the book I grew up with in translation into Russian. And it would never ever cross my mind that it would be such an interesting discovery behind this quote. But my question is not about this, although thank you. I mean, I still cannot forget your very intriguing explanation. So, but my question is about the genre. Many books that you quoted are written in the form of a diary. Do you believe that the diary as a form is influenced by Anne Frank, by the form that is sort of is already established as a Holocaust revelation by a child, you know, is popular, and this is why it is exploited again and again.
I remember that a diary of Anna Frank is the text inspired, which is inspired by another book. Anna Frank. I don't remember the title of this book, but Anna Frank wrote a book very popular among young people before the Second War, and she inspired this book. Dear Kitty, her friend, was inspired by a hero from this book. I think the diary is very simple and very subjective and very personal way of writing. You are a scientist, so you know the much about diary, but young people not. But maybe this form of writing, this form of transmitting of information, feelings is very original for them.
You know, I mean, original, I agree, but original in a way that this new generation that those books are written for, they don't know what the diary is. They are by their cell phones, I mean, they have any other form of communication. They don't know how to write complete sentences, you know, because they have all those images, you know, that help them to express themselves. So this is why I don't understand the contemporary obsession with the diary genre, because in my opinion, and Sarah, please jump in, because this is sort of your area. So, because in my opinion, this is a failure rather than a success, because if you want to talk to the generation that is born now, you know, you have to figure out another form of communication.
But maybe it's, if I may add bottom, Marina, I think, okay, you're right. It's not the best way to get to today's young people, and they don't know a lot about diaries, but the word itself says that it's something what really happened, and that's maybe why, because these books are written by authors who are not young anymore, and for them it's also it's also important, this factor of authenticity. So maybe that's why. That's the only thing I think about by this phenomenon of diary as a genre. I don't know.
As a genre, I accept. I'm not fighting it. Yeah.
But maybe because Małgorzata, I know you have written an article about diaries as a genre in Polish literature. Maybe you have another explanation for the popularity of this genre.
It was a question.
From Sarah.
Maybe you know another explanation for the popularity of diary as genre.
Okay. Thank you very much. Diary is the voice of person, of imagination, of kind of feelings. So I think it is very important for us. I have lived in Belgium, and it is a town of Lubelski. Lubelski is I don't like this definition, but Lubelski is a Polish Anna Frank. She was a girl who was killed during the Second World War after the deportation to Auschwitz from Berlin, and she had a diary. This diary is published and is very fragmentary. It is a very modern way of writing. This diary consists of very types of understanding of reality or word of point of view. It's very modern. It's very modern text. Alternative maybe to Anna Frank's diary.
Thank you so much. And there is a question from Sarah Winslow. Sarah, what time is now in United States?
Well, I'm in California. It's 4 a.m.
Okay, this is Martin Brown. Thank you so much. And
That's what my dog is here
Yeah.
asking me why.
Yeah.
Marina, of course, you are also.
Well, I mean, I started this new walk in the morning, so yeah. Oh my God, look at those walkies.
Sarah,
I did want to add, in terms of diaries, at least here in the U.S., a lot of the scholarship has talked about how diaries as a genre invite a certain level of intimacy, questions about authenticity, and first-person perspectives, especially hearing those voices as we get further away from events because fewer survivors are still around. And so in order to avoid different aspects of denial even, then it's important to hear those first-person accounts. But I do take Marina's point that I don't think that they're super appealing to young readers, and I do think that young readers right now have so many different genres and topics pulling, like vying for their attention, that a book has to also be super engaging. And sometimes these books that are just ramblings of an everyday life of a child that lived a lot of years ago in a place that they're not familiar with for a lot of them, it's not the most engaging read. And it sounds terrible to say, oh, you need something to engage you when you're learning, but that is sort of, educationally, that is the case. So Adrian Kurzer's written about the role of memoir, because memoir can take, it can take a little more creativity, and it can take a little more liberties, because when you're reconstructing memory, you're obviously going to have gaps or dialogues that you fictionalize or you make up as you go. Whereas if you're claiming something as a diary, then it's thought to be, I guess, more authentic. So I think there is this tension between the genres and between engaging the readers, and where do you do that in children's literature is still an ongoing question, I think.
Okay, thank you so much. Małgorzata.
Sorry, I didn't ask a question. I just wanted to share that. I need to go to sleep.
I don't know. It's a very good question, but a very difficult question. But I think that we talked about another situation and another text. You talked about, speak about. I think I don't know, about diary of real diary of survivors maybe, and I think about diary in the future. It's a novel text. It's imagined situation. This kind of text is are inspired only, but it's there are no proof of the past. So the difference is huge, I think.
Okay, thank you so much. It was the last question because we have now a lunch break. Everybody is very hungry. Thank you so much for your presence and see you at 4 o'clock Lublin time. I don't know which is the time in Los Angeles or in Wisconsin, but we are waiting for you. And now a few announcements. Now there is a lunch break. We can meet in Uszewca at Shoemaker, but not Shoemaker as a place where you can repair your shoes, but Shoemaker as a Irish pub. And there is a lunch break, and we have only 1 hour to have it, but it is so little time because it is possible to drink beer during this